They took my keys in front of the whole church hall, just slid the lanyard off my neck with the same careful expression you'd use to lift a sleeping child. Leah spoke softly so it would sound kind on the surface, but her fingers pinched the laminated tag hard enough to leave a mark on my skin, and she had already turned to the crowd before I could react. "Maggie's hands shake these days. I'll do the banking for the fundraiser," she announced, smiling at the queue waiting to pay for lemon slices and tea. My hands were steady on the knife, steady on the till, but she'd timed it to the end of the raffle when the hall was loud, and Daniel, my son, stood behind her with his arms folded as if my whole life fit inside that lanyard. I didn't argue. I know when an argument is a performance and when it's a conversation, and this was the kind of show they like to put on: her righteousness, his silence, my supposed frailty. I kept slicing cake and kept my voice level, and if anyone noticed that I took the last tray in the back and stayed there too long, they filed it with the other small indignities of a woman my age, something to pat and bypass. But I saw the look the caretaker, Ludo, gave me. He'd watched 100 little scenes in that hall and knew the ones that hurt. "I should tell you who I am, since you've already met my humiliation. I'm Margaret Holt, though almost everyone calls me Maggie except the ones who prefer the way Margaret sits like a full stop. I'm 68, a widow of 6 years, the sort of woman people describe as organized when they need a volunteer and fussy when they want you to stop asking questions. I was a school bursar for 27 years. Numbers tell me the truth even when people won't. My late husband, Tom, was the heart of the Caldine Residence Fund, the little charity we run to buy equipment for the clinic and subsidize home carers for the street's older folks. We didn't have much, but we made it honest and small and real. After Tom died, I kept it going because he would have hated to see it vanish with him. And because the work pulled me out of the house and into rooms where I still mattered. Leah arrived in our family like a new brand of certainty, everything lacquered and shiny, immaculate receipts, a label maker, a way of speaking to the elderly that sounded like kindness and felt like supervision. She's smart, I won't deny it. She knows how to fill out forms that scare other people. Daniel liked that about her, that she's capable. He likes to be carried by a current and call it a plan. He tells everyone his mother is independent, which he means as an alibi rather than a fact, because it means he can be proud of me in photographs and absent in rooms where something must be signed. You'll want the start, the real start, the moment when the first thread loosened. I think it was the day the bank started sending notices that our branch was transitioning to digital services. I went in to change the signatories on the Caldine Fund after our treasurer moved away. The woman at the counter, Imogen, bent over the form with me while we stood at a little shelf meant for pens and bags of coins. Her hair was dyed the color of berry tea, and she'd learned to make herself invisible behind politeness. When she read the names, she glanced up. "You already have Daniel Holt on the mandate, Mrs. Holt. Is he still active?" she asked low. "He's never been active," I said before I could swallow it, and she hid a smile. I added, "He'll be removed. It's just me and Leah on the new mandate until we vote in a replacement at the AGM." That was a Tuesday. On Thursday, a white envelope came through my letterbox with the new online banking activation code for the charity account, even though I hadn't requested it yet. I thought perhaps the bank had sent it automatically. Inside was a green sticky note that said in a neat, masculine hand, "Caldine Trust, Mandate." Not Caldine Fund. Trust. I keep the envelope in the used cake tin now, because the smell of sugar and lemon hides the paper's sharper scent of toner and concern. At the church hall, when Leah lifted my lanyard and smiled at the crowd, I felt the ragged edge of that note like a splinter under my skin. I muttered something about tea bags and retreated to the back room where we keep the urns. I washed my hands longer than necessary and found an old photograph pinned under the corkboard with the lost property tags. It was from a Christmas party 10 years ago. Tom was in it, holding a strip of raffle tickets and making that ridiculous face he did when he pretended to be shocked by his own good luck. In the edge of the frame, blurred but unmistakable, was a man who'd helped the fund with our first accounting software, Oliver Crane, Leah's brother. I remembered his voice. He spoke like an advertisement for a thing you didn't know you already owned. I should say, for the sake of the truth, that Leah never openly insulted me. She is too careful for that. She doesn't shout, doesn't call me a burden, doesn't shove me into a taxi with a suitcase. She uses the softer weapons: a medical appointment, I thought you might forget, a group text that renders me kindly obsolete, an email that CCs Daniel and the vicar and the clinic coordinator, saying, I've taken this off Maggie's plate so she can rest. The result is the same. One by one, the plates leave, and you are just a woman sitting with her hands in her lap, watching someone else carry your life. I learned to answer in scenes. When she took the lanyard, I quietly counted the raffle money twice in front of her without touching a calculator. When she told the hall I shouldn't lift the urn, I carried it across the floor without spilling. And when Daniel called after to say, Mum, Leah's only trying to help. You know you can be, he hesitated, particular. I set the phone on the worktop and let him listen to the sound of me sealing envelopes with a wet sponge and a steady rhythm. Hear that? I asked when he stopped talking. That's not a hand that shakes, Daniel. Later that week, I found the first inconsistency. The clinic posted their thanks for our donation on their Facebook page, the one I check from my old tablet after watering the plants. They said the Caldine Fund's gift of £3,500 had paid for the new wheelchair scales, and they tagged Leah's business page. She runs a lifestyle admin service, which means she declutters people's lives and invoices them for breathing out. Only the donation I'd approved at the last meeting was £5,000. £1,500 doesn't just lose its way between a checkbook and a scale. I scrolled down, ignoring the little storm of blue thumbs and heart balloons, and saw a new name in the comment thread, Caldine Community Trust. No, I thought. Not fund. Trust. I went to see Imogen again, though I knew the bank hates walk-ins now and loves to shepherd people in front of screens. It was raining, that small English rain that soaks you by being almost nothing. She glanced at the door when I came in, and the guard did what he always does with me, a friendly nod that makes space without stopping anything dangerous. Mrs. Holt, she said in the voice of someone who has decided she can be helpful at least once that day. Let me just. She tapped a screen. If it's about the app, I can show you how to. It's about the mandate, I said, and lowered my voice. And the word trust. Imogen frowned like a teacher who's heard a wrong answer and is trying to remember if the question was clear. She leaned closer. We can't discuss other organizations' accounts, she began, then paused. But we can discuss your own security. If you think there's been a change, you might want to check your post for any new cards or readers you didn't request. Also, if someone set up a second account with a similar name, we'd usually flag that internally too. Her words faded as she caught herself. She tucked a loose strand of berry hair behind her ear and slid a small, blank card across the desk with the bank's logo embossed in the corner. If you need to contact our fraud liaison, the number's on the back. And, she said more quietly, if any payments were made to a new payee, the confirmation would list the account name. Sometimes people don't read those carefully if they trust the person who sent the details. Trust. The word kept coming back like a boomerang that doesn't care if you want to catch it. When I got home, I made tea I didn't want and lined up my papers on the kitchen table. I keep my late husband's fountain pen in a drawer with the rubber bands, because he used to say nothing deserves a velvet case except a violin. The bank statements for the fund told one story, the clinic's Facebook told a different one. And then there was the envelope with the activation code I hadn't requested, peering at me from the cake tin like a mouth I'd forgotten to close. I am afraid of being a burden, yes. I'm afraid of the day when my own son prefers my absence because it simplifies his calendar. But I am more afraid of numbers that change without being asked. I phoned Leah. She answered on the second ring with her professional voice, the one she uses with clients and with me when she intends to file me under tasks. Maggie, hi, she said brightly. I was just about to call you. I've set up the online access for the fund. It's so much easier then. Did you set up a trust? I asked, no brightness, because I learned a long time ago that the first sentence decides who gets to steer. There was a pause so precise it might have been measured. We're reorganizing the structure to make it more robust, she replied. Oliver said a trust has better governance. It's basically the same money, just with clearer oversight. By whom? I asked. By trustees, obviously. You and me and Daniel, plus Oliver as a professional co-trustee, she said quickly, as if listing things fast could make them true. It protects you too. Less admin for you, less pressure. You can finally focus on your health. My health is fine, I said, and she made a soft, apologetic noise, the audio version of patting my hand. You changed the structure without a vote, Leah. The fund isn't formal enough to require a vote, she said, and I felt the blood move in me, old and hot. We've been meaning to formalize for ages. This is what Tom would have wanted. Transparency. She was very good, you see. She used Tom like a key. She oiled the door with the words transparency and protection and health. She invited me to the room where the decisions had already been made. I swallowed the bitter thing that rose in my mouth and asked for the documents. She promised to bring them by for my signature as soon as you're rested. After I hung up, I did what I do when I don't know whether to scream or cry. I mended something. I took the old blue cardigan from the back of a chair and sewed a loose button with thread that didn't match, the deliberate wrongness a small rebellion. The needle moved in my hands like a metronome. Numbers. Punctures. Returns. By the time the button sat securely, I had a plan big enough to address my fear and small enough not to look like a plan. I printed the Charity Commission's guide to setting up a trust and underlined the parts where they talked about votes, minutes, and conflicts of interest. I phoned our neighbor Hetty because her cousin runs the volunteer center and always knows a retired lawyer who misses his office. And then I baked a lemon drizzle with the last of the sugar so I'd have an excuse to drop by the vicarage and leave it with a note that read, "We should talk about governance before the AGM." At the next Caldine Street WhatsApp bursts, the messages were in the usual tone of slightly forced cheer, pictures of dogs, complaints about bins, an argument about the speed bumps in which Mrs. Nolan compared the council to pirates. Then Leah posted a photo of the new scales at the clinic with a caption, "So proud to modernize local healthcare." #Caldine Community Trust. People sent clapping emojis. Mr. Ferris sent, "Brilliant work, Leah and Daniel and Maggie." I watched the order of the names like a weather report. When I went in my GP for a blood pressure check, the nurse told me, "Your daughter-in-law is a marvel, isn't she? It's good you don't have all that responsibility anymore." She said it kindly and meant it, and I smiled and asked for a printout of my readings to stick on my fridge because I wanted a piece of paper that said in numbers that I was not fragile. The first time I understood that we were not just playing at optics was a week later when Leah brought a neat folder to my kitchen table and slid it toward me with both hands. "Just sign here and here and here," she said, tapping the pages with a pen that said Crane and Company. Accounting. Oliver's pen. "It's mostly housekeeping." I read. My habit of reading slowly has annoyed more people than my forgetfulness has. They hover and sigh and say, "Do you need your glasses?" I did not need my glasses. I needed silence. The housekeeping included a deed transferring the Caldine Fund's balance into an account named Caldine Community Trust and appointing 4 trustees, one of whom, Oliver, would be paid a modest monthly administrative fee. There was also a document titled Letter of Wishes that had my name printed above a line, offering guidance from the founder, me, to the trustees about how to spend the funds. Guidance is nothing like authority. I signed nothing. I tucked the pen under the folder and smiled with teeth, which I reserve for special occasions. "I'd like to have these reviewed," I said. "Reviewed by whom?" Leah asked, light as a feather. "By someone who isn't your brother," I said. "And if he's being paid, he isn't a volunteer. Which makes him a contractor. Which makes him a conflict of interest." Leah's expression didn't change, but her shoulders did. A little. "Maggie, you're making this hard," she said. "All this is to keep things tidy and to protect you. If you can't keep up with the paperwork, there's a simpler way." She drew out another form from the back and placed it on top where I couldn't avoid it. I recognized it immediately, a form to register a lasting power of attorney for property and financial affairs. "If you're tired, we can do this instead. It would be easier for everyone." There it was, not spoken as insult but as kindness. Be tired, be grateful, hand over the bus pass of your life. I could hear Tom's voice howling, which he never did in life, so I set my hand flat on the table the way I used to do when a child stood over me with a temper. "I'm not signing anything today," I said. "Daniel can look in when he gets here." "He's on his way," Leah said, and the way she said it told me that he'd been on his way before she rang my bell. While we waited, she made tea from my cupboard like she lived there. I watched her put the tea bag in after the milk and wondered, not for the first time, whether people like her are born or made by households that tell them they're emperors. Daniel arrived with that strained polite face he gets when he knows he should disagree, but can't manage it. "Mum, we're thinking of your future," he said, touching my shoulder the way people touch strangers on escalators to move them. "If you set up the LPA, you don't have to worry about bills or scammers. Remember when you almost renewed that magazine you don't read?" "That was 3 years ago and I wanted the tote bag," I replied, which annoyed him because it was funny, and he hates when a point gets punctured by a laugh. "You want me to be safe. I want the charity to be clean. Those aren't mutually exclusive." Leah's phone lit up and she glanced at it, then angled it away from me. "I have seen that gesture on teenagers and men who think you don't notice." Her thumb danced, and for 1 second the screen tilted, and I caught a glimpse of an email preview from Oliver that read, "Transfer from Caldine Fund cleared, rename complete. Need your signature for mandate backdated too." She set the phone face down as if she had put a bird to sleep. "I'm going to consult someone," I said. "We'll reconvene after the AGM." "The AGM is this Saturday," Leah said brightly. "At the hall. We'll introduce the trust then. It'll be wonderful." "I'll bring a cake," I said. I would bring more than a cake. That night it wasn't anger that kept me awake, it was arithmetic. The day has numbers you can measure, money in and out, steps to the corner shop, tablets taken before bed. Night has deeper numbers. Years you've been someone's mother, minutes since the last time they phoned for a reason that wasn't a form, days until a meeting that might reassign your life. I lay awake and stared at the ceiling and heard again the quiet sentence Leah had rehearsed. "If you're tired, we can do this instead." It was a door they wanted to usher me through and lock behind me with lavender-scented concern. At 3 in the morning, while the street yawned and the foxes ran their soft routes, I went to the kitchen and pulled out the biscuit tin with Tom's fishing license and the spare passport photos that look like a stranger I don't want to sit next to on a bus. At the bottom was the blue folder with our old solicitor's card. I don't much like lawyers. Their chairs are either too soft or too hard, but I like rules. I like knowing things are written down in ink that won't wash away. The card smelled of dust. I pressed it flat and emailed the address on the back, expecting a bounce, and when a reply chimed an hour later from a woman named E. Turner, I felt something in me sit up straight. "Mrs. Holt," she wrote, "I'm happy to review any documents relating to your role. There may be safeguarding considerations if anyone is seeking to change your authority under pressure. My father was the T. Turner on that old card. He'll be thrilled the stapler he loved paid for his name to stay on. Please bring whatever you have. And if you don't have it, tell me what was waved under your nose. We'll reconstruct." I printed her email and put it in my handbag next to a packet of tissues and a boiled sweet I've carried since my granddaughter was small enough to believe sweets just appear in grandmother's pockets. Then I went back to bed and slept like a woman who has decided to stand in a doorway. The next days were a string of small humiliations that would have been invisible to anyone not counting. Leah moved the WhatsApp group to a new chat titled Caldine Trust Steering, and I was added but not given admin rights. The vicar sent a message asking me to avoid overloading the meeting with procedural concerns because people find votes intimidating. The clinic's manager sent me a thank you card addressed to Maggie and the trust team, as if my name had been moved up from footnote to footman. "When I went to the grocery, Mrs. Nolan asked loudly at the queue, "Are you stepping back finally, Margaret? It'll be good for you, love. Time to enjoy." I said nothing because it's only people like Leah who can afford to look like they're above the gossip. The rest of us must survive it. Then Hetty leaned over my fence with a plant cutting and said in that casual tone women use when they're delivering a bomb, I shouldn't say, but I will. Oliver asked my Alan if he could be a silent trustee, which we thought meant not going to meetings. But now I wonder. She trailed off because she'd seen Leah's car pass slowly at the end of the street. We both pretended to admire the plant's leaves. When the car turned the corner, Hetty added, ears everywhere. Watch your post. I watched my post. The next white envelope had a return address printed faintly, Crane and Company. I took it with me to the hall the night before the AGM because Ludo had asked for help counting chairs. He is a big man with a careful voice. He wears his keys around his waist like a belt and never looks surprised by anything. We laid out the chairs like a grid you could sit inside. When he went to fetch the cordless microphone, I slit the envelope with a butter knife from the tiny kitchen and slid out a form. Acknowledgement of resignation as treasurer, it said at the top. Treasurer was never my formal title. We had no titles, only roles. Me, did the banking, someone else baked, someone else put up posters. The form had a signature line with my name pre-printed, and below it, a second line titled, Witness. Ludo stood in the door as I read and said nothing. When I looked up, his eyes were on the paper, not on me. They brought that by yesterday, he said quietly. Asked if I'd put it on the table ready for you. Said you'd want to sign before the crowds. Who asked? I said. He rubbed the back of his neck. You're Leah and a man with a suit that didn't fit him like it wanted to. I said I'd put it out. I didn't say I'd leave you alone with it. He hesitated. I've seen papers swapped and not seen by the right eyes. You should know I've set the new camera in the corridor to record the table at the entrance. Nobody asked me to, so nobody can tell me not to. There are moments when a person who has been an observer quietly chooses to become a witness. They don't make speeches about it. They say something like, I set the camera. I felt something like gratitude and fear tangle in my throat. Thank you, I said. Could you keep that recording for me? I can keep it for 2 weeks before the system overwrites, he said, tapping his keyring with his thumb. Or longer if someone asks me officially. Someone will, I said. Soon. Before I left, I tucked the resignation form back into its envelope and wrote, in a neat hand on the flap, not today. Then I put it in the cake tin I was bringing tomorrow, under the last slice of lemon drizzle. When I got home, Imogen had left a voicemail saying she couldn't say much, but that sometimes a bank will allow similar names if the organization's registration numbers are different. But if any money moved without a proper resolution, there might be a case for misrepresentation. Also, check the bank's policy on mandate changes. Backdating is frowned upon. She said it like the weather, but I heard the thunder. That night, the WhatsApp chirped with little messages about chairs and paper cups and whether the microphone had fresh batteries. Leah wrote, We will open with a thank you to Maggie for her years of service. Short and sweet. And then, privately, Daniel texted me, Please don't make this a scene, Mum. Let's have a nice day. I looked at the ceiling again and thought of all the nice days I had spent being invisible. I typed and deleted and typed again until I finally wrote, It'll be a day, Daniel. Nice is in the eye of the beholder. On the morning of the AGM, I ironed my blouse even though no one else would notice and pinned Tom's old Caldine badge on the collar. It's a small badge, blue enamel with a white line that says, We look after our own. I put the solicitor's letter in my bag, the bank envelope, the screenshot of the clinic's post with the amount they claimed, the email from Oliver about the backdated mandate that I had photographed through an angle and a prayer. I also put 2 other things that felt like talismans. The photograph from the hall's corkboard where Oliver's face is blurred at the edge of Tom's laugh, and the postcard Tom sent me from a school trip years ago, on which he'd written, You're the only one I would trust with the cash tin and my heart. The card is sun-faded and I'm the only one who needs to read it, but carrying it felt like a spine. I arrived early to watch the room fill. People came with their opinions worn like coats, some zipped up, some undone, some too tight. Leah stood near the front with a clipboard and a smile and an outfit that managed to be both humble and expensive. Daniel hovered beside her, invisible in his own life. Oliver arrived 10 minutes late with a leather folder and nodded to the vicar as if blessing him. Ludo tested the microphone and said, 1 2, 1 2, as if checking sound, but I heard it as a counting of allies. Leah opened the meeting with her bright voice and her careful eyes. Before we begin the exciting transition to the Caldine Community Trust, she said, I want to thank Maggie for everything she's done. She's the heart of this, and we'll let her rest now while we handle the heavy lifting. People clapped because clapping is easier than thinking. I stood when the clapping ended because I have learned that you stand when you want to be seen. I held up the cake tin like a prop and the room laughed gently. I've brought lemon drizzle, I said into the microphone, and questions. We can start with whichever you prefer. The microphone crackled in my hand the way the air does before a storm. Leah smiled harder. Of course, Maggie, she said. We'll have questions after the vote. Let's stay on schedule. I have a concern about the vote, I replied. Specifically about the documents underpinning it. I turned slightly. Ludo, would you fetch the envelope they left for me yesterday? The one about my resignation. He looked at Leah and then at me and then at the audience as if a jury had asked him in 3 directions to speak. He nodded, disappeared into the back room, and returned with the envelope untouched. He handed it to me like a ceremonial object. I lifted the flap and began to read, my voice steady, my fear behind me for once instead of in front. I read the title. I read the part about the backdating. I read the line that would have made me smaller if I'd signed. And then I set the paper down, and if the room had lungs, they would have held their breath. I looked toward the door because I'd asked someone else to be there with a piece of the truth. I hadn't been sure they would come. That was when the door opened, and the bank clerk with berry-colored hair stepped in, smoothing the rain from her coat, carrying a plain folder with the bank's embossed logo, and the entire room turned its head toward a woman who normally handed out pens behind a counter. She met my eye and gave the tiniest nod, the kind that says, I kept the recording. I brought the policy. I am not invisible today. And then, before anyone could speak, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number that contained only a photograph, a close-up of a signature that looked like mine on a document titled Trustees Resolution, dated 2 days before. With my name spelled correctly and my handwriting almost perfect except for the small flourish I never make on a G. I felt the room tilt inside me. Someone had signed for me. The lemon drizzle suddenly seemed absurd. I lifted the microphone again and heard my own voice lower into a place I did not know I still had. Before we vote, I said, I think we should talk about forgery. The room fell into a silence so clean you could have laid a table on it. Leah's smile froze and then recalibrated. Daniel's eyes darted, looking for the nearest small door. Oliver's fingers tightened on his leather folder. The vicar muttered something like a prayer or a swear and folded his hands. And Ludo, stalwart and solid, reached toward the little remote he used to test the hall's new security camera. Maggie, Leah began, let's not. But I had already turned to the screen at the back of the hall, where the projector hummed, waiting, and where a paused frame showed 2 people at the table by the entrance. One of them in a suit that didn't fit, and the other in a camel coat I knew was mine, because Leah had borrowed it last winter and never returned it. I looked at the faces in front of me, at my son who had loved me in every way except the one that counted today, and for the first time in months, I did not feel like a burden. I felt like a witness. And then the mains power flickered, the projector blinked, and the screen went black. Someone had just pulled a plug from the wall. What are you doing? Ludo shouted, not in his careful voice. We all turned to see who had killed the picture. The weeks after that dinner became a kind of trial by fire. Victoria and Kevin visited almost daily, and each time they came, I felt more like an intruder in my own home. They no longer knocked before entering. The front door would open, and I'd hear their voices echoing through the hallway as if the place already belonged to them. Kevin once tossed his car keys on my kitchen counter, leaned back in my chair, and declared, we'll probably repaint everything once we move in. This beige is so depressing. I didn't even reply. My silence seemed to amuse him more than any comeback ever could. One afternoon, Victoria came with a folder of glossy pamphlets. She spread them across the dining table I had polished with my own hands for decades. The papers smelled faintly of fresh ink, and each one featured smiling seniors playing cards or doing yoga in identical, soulless-looking apartments. Mom, you'd be happier in a place like this, she said, tapping a photograph of a woman who could have been my age. See, you'd have friends, activities, no stress. Kevin added without looking up from his phone, and it would be more practical for us. You'd be taken care of, and we'd know you were safe. I noticed how he said us instead of you. I kept my face calm, though my stomach tightened. I asked, did you find this place online? Or did someone recommend it? Victoria hesitated just a second too long before answering. Kevin's colleague mentioned it. Very affordable. My daughter said the word affordable as if she was selling me a second-hand coat. I looked at the fine print: admission fee, monthly dues, medical assessments. It was clear what she wanted. If I moved there, the house would be theirs instantly, no waiting, no inheritance process. Sunday dinners changed tone too. What had once been simple family meals turned into negotiations disguised as small talk. Victoria would pour wine, Kevin would carve the roast, and somewhere between passing the potatoes and the salad, one of them would circle back to the subject. Mom, you deserve a break from housework. Mom, wouldn't it be nice to have people your age around you? Mom, don't you think this staircase is dangerous? Each phrase was a rehearsed line in their campaign. And my son-in-law's eyes always measured my reactions with a cold precision I couldn't ignore. Neighbors started asking questions too. Mrs. Klein from across the street caught me at the mailbox. Margaret, I hear Victoria's planning to move in. Is that true? I forced a smile and said, nothing's been decided. She gave me that pitying look I'd grown to hate. Well, it must be nice to have young people looking after you. Young people looking after me, those words lingered all day, making me feel like a relic in my own neighborhood. Even at the grocery store, when Victoria accompanied me, she spoke loudly enough for others to hear. Mom, don't lift that, you'll hurt yourself. People turned their heads, some with sympathy, others with judgment. My cheeks burned each time. Then came the first official humiliation. Victoria invited her friends to the house without telling me. I returned from a short walk to find a group of women in my living room sipping wine, admiring the crown molding, and laughing at how quaint the kitchen looked. Oh, this will be perfect for us, Victoria told them as if I were invisible. One of her friends even asked if I was the housekeeper. Victoria didn't correct her immediately. She just smiled and said later, lightly, well, you do keep things tidy, Mom. That night, I cried into my pillow, though I made sure no one ever heard me. Financial pressure soon followed. I noticed strange envelopes arriving in the mail, documents Victoria always snatched up before I could see them. One day I intercepted one, a letter from the bank addressed to Robert's estate. It referred to a review of accounts, requested updated signatures, and mentioned guardianship clauses. When I asked Victoria about it, she waved it off. Oh, Mom, it's just standard paperwork. I'll take care of it. You wouldn't understand all the technical details. Her voice was gentle, but the undertone was sharp. Don't ask questions. Stay quiet. Kevin became bolder too. He once cornered me in the hallway, his cologne suffocating in the narrow space. You know, Margaret, it's really for the best if you let us handle things. Financials, property management, all of it. You've never had a head for money, have you? I lifted my chin and replied, I managed my household for 43 years. That requires some head for money. His smirk didn't fade. But investments, inheritance, taxes, it's complicated. You don't want to make a mistake, do you? He patted my shoulder as if soothing a child. The whispers grew louder. At church, I overheard two women discussing me. Poor Margaret, she can't live alone anymore. Her daughter is right to step in. I wanted to turn around and tell them the truth, that I was perfectly capable, that I had run every detail of this house and my life without anyone's help, but I stayed quiet. Speaking would have sounded defensive, and defensiveness is often mistaken for guilt. So I listened to them rewrite my story in real time. The breaking point came one Saturday morning. Victoria and Kevin arrived with 2 large boxes and a folder. We've made arrangements, Victoria announced cheerfully. Arrangements for what? I asked. She pulled out a paper and handed it to me. It was a contract, gift of property, it said at the top. Kevin explained with a grin, if you sign this, Mom, the house will be legally ours now, but you'll still be able to live here until we decide otherwise. It's really the best solution for everyone. I read the fine print with trembling hands. The clause was clear. Once I signed, I relinquished all rights, including future inheritance claims. Essentially, I'd be a guest in my own home, dependent on their goodwill. My throat went dry. Victoria leaned forward, her eyes soft, her voice honeyed. Mom, please, don't make this harder than it needs to be. You can trust us. We'll take care of you." The way she said it made my skin crawl. I asked quietly, "And if I don't sign?" Kevin's smile thinned. "Then things could get complicated. There are expenses, taxes, upkeep. You might struggle, Margaret. Why put yourself through that?" I excused myself to the kitchen, claiming I needed water. My hands shook so violently I could hardly pour a glass. I heard their muffled voices in the living room, confident I was already broken down. But in that moment, something shifted inside me. The fear of being a burden, the shame of dependence, the humiliation I'd swallowed for weeks, all of it condensed into a quiet, solid determination. I wasn't going to sign. Not yet. Not ever, not without knowing the truth hidden behind all these papers and polite lies. I returned and slid the unsigned contract back across the table. "I need time," I said evenly. Kevin's jaw tightened, but Victoria masked her irritation with a smile. "Of course, Mom. Take all the time you need. But remember, the sooner we handle this, the better for everyone." They packed their boxes and left, but not before Kevin whispered near the door, "Don't wait too long. Banks can be unforgiving." That night, unable to sleep, I went through Robert's old desk drawers. Tucked behind some tax returns, I found an envelope labeled simply, Harrison F. My heart raced. I recognized the name, Robert's lawyer, the man who had helped us purchase this house. Inside were neatly clipped documents, copies of our will, lists of accounts, a handwritten note from Robert to me. "Margaret, if you're reading this, it means I didn't have time to explain everything. Trust Fitzgerald. He knows my wishes. Do not let anyone rush you." My breath caught in my chest. Robert had left me a breadcrumb, and suddenly Victoria's insistence on handling everything made terrible sense. The following morning, I called the law office, asking to see Mr. Fitzgerald. His secretary hesitated before replying, "Mrs. Sullivan, your daughter said you were traveling." Traveling? My blood ran cold. Victoria had told them I wasn't available, that she would handle everything. I insisted, "My affairs are my own. I will come in myself." The secretary's voice softened. "Of course, Mrs. Sullivan. We'll expect you Monday at 10. I hung up and sat in the silence of my kitchen, the letter trembling in my hand. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to hope. But I also knew, if Victoria discovered I had found Robert's note, if Kevin realized I was reaching for help, their mask of politeness would drop completely. The next Sunday dinner, Victoria arrived with a tighter smile than usual. She placed her handbag on the chair, her eyes scanning me carefully. Kevin's phone buzzed repeatedly, his fingers restless. Between bites of roast chicken, Victoria asked too casually, "So, Mom, have you given any more thought to the contract?" I sipped my water, keeping my face neutral. "I'm still considering." Kevin's gaze was sharp, his patience thinning. "Well, don't take too long. Opportunities don't last forever." I looked at my daughter, the woman I had raised, who now watched me like a hawk circling prey. For years, I had feared being alone, feared being useless. But at that table, surrounded by the ghosts of every humiliation I had endured, I realized I wasn't the helpless pawn they believed me to be. Because Robert had left me more than memories. He had left me the means to fight back. And soon, very soon, they would discover I wasn't as defenseless as I seemed. When the screen went black and the room swallowed its own breath, I recognized the hand on the plug a heartbeat before anyone else did. It was the vicar's curate, a young man who had always been polite to me at the tea urn, his face pale and fixed now, knuckles white around the cable. "Leah was already speaking before the shock loosened. There must be a fault. We'll just carry on without theatrics," and she tilted her head toward the curate with a look that said more than words. Ludo moved faster than I thought a man his size could, took the plug gently from the curate's hand, and reconnected it. The projector hummed back to life, but the camera feed had stopped. The system required a new command, and whatever we'd been about to show was gone from the paused buffer. Murmurs rose like steam. I felt the choice arrive, simple and heavy. Either let the moment pass or pin it to the table and make everyone look at it. I chose the second. I raised the microphone and said I would not speak over a blank screen. Either we watched the recording as planned, or we adjourned without voting and reconvened with independent oversight. The vicar cleared his throat as if to regain control of a service that had turned into something else entirely and suggested a brief recess. People stood, stretched, and moved into clusters. Leah came close enough for only me to hear. "You're making this unpleasant for everyone, Maggie. Think of your role here." "My role," I said, "is to protect the fund that pays for our neighbors' care." She blinked as if I had answered a different question. During the recess, Ludo ushered me into the small office behind the stage. He shut the door softly, turned the key, and pulled a USB stick from his pocket. "I saved an automatic copy to this as soon as I saw the two of them at the table yesterday," he said, eyes on mine, so I would understand the importance of the object between his fingers. "The live feed died, but the original's safe." He placed the stick in my palm. "Don't leave it in your bag. People know what to look for." I nodded and slid it into my shoe under the arch of my foot, where it would be uncomfortable but unreachable to a searching hand. Imogen from the bank slipped in then, quieter than the door. She carried a plain folder and a careful expression. "I can't give you bank data," she said quickly, "but I can tell you process. Any change to an account mandate for a community group requires written evidence of authority, and we record names verbatim as they appear on the resolution. If there's a trust with a similar name, we will sometimes allow a new payee profile to be created, but we flag if origin and destination seem connected. If signatures don't match, our risk team looks closely." She set a printed page on the desk and tapped a paragraph. "This is our public policy on backdating. It's a red line." I read the sentence and felt the steadiness I know from balancing a ledger, the comfort of a rule that doesn't flex for politeness. "And," she added lower, "I've asked our liaison to note that you, personally, have raised concerns and that no further mandate changes should be processed without a branch manager's review. That puts a brake on things without accusing anyone." We returned to the hall and found Leah already at the microphone introducing a minor reordering of the agenda so that we can celebrate volunteers while our tech is reset. She had turned a near crisis into a cheerful delay with the ease of someone who had practiced being believed. The curate stared at the floor. Daniel avoided my eyes and examined his cuff button as if it had done him harm. Oliver watched the room the way a driver watches mirrors. Ludo crossed his arms in a way that made his keychain knock softly against his hip, a rhythm that calmed me more than any prayer. When the meeting reconvened, I did not fight for the projector. I asked for minutes. "Before we vote," I said, "we need a record of what's been proposed and by whom, including the date the trust was formed, the resolution authorizing the transfer of funds, and the role of any paid administrators." Oliver leaned forward to answer as if he were a guest on a panel. "The trust was formed last month, perfectly legal, and the transfer is a tidying exercise. Your founder's letter of wishes will guide us, Maggie. Nothing to worry about." He smiled the way a person smiles at a client he expects to close. I didn't smile back. "We'll need the registration number and the list of trustees," I said. "If a trustee is paid, that must be disclosed to the donors." He didn't like the word donors. It made it obvious that the money wasn't his. We ended that meeting without a vote. Leah's closing line was smooth: "We'll circulate documents for transparency," and most people left feeling reassured the way one feels reassured when someone confident says soothing things. On the way out, Hetty squeezed my arm and murmured, "I'll put the kettle on later if you want to sit somewhere nobody calls you dear." I smiled, grateful for the offer and for the wryness that kept me from collapsing into self-pity. Ludo walked me to the door and placed a second, smaller USB in my hand. "Front entrance camera. Last 3 days," he said. "Different angle. You might need that one too." At home, I took off my shoe and set the first USB in a custard dish on the counter because it was the cleanest container in reach. I printed Imogen's policy sheet and clipped it to the envelope with the backdated resolution photo. I added the screenshot of the clinic's thank you post with the wrong amount and the trust's name. Then I opened my laptop and wrote to the solicitor who had replied in the night, the one with the initial in her email signature. I wrote simply, "Documents to review attached. Concern: trust formed without vote, apparent backdating, charitable funds moved under new control, potential forgery of my signature. Please advise on steps to preserve evidence and halt further movement." I hit send and listened to the quiet tick of the kitchen clock that has only ever measured real time, not the kinds people invent to hurry you. Her reply arrived within the hour. Come at 9 tomorrow. Bring originals and the people you trust to witness your account of events. We will draft a letter before action to the trust and to any bank involved. Also, we may want to file a safeguarding alert, not because you are incapable, but because coercion around a lasting power of attorney is, in itself, a safeguarding concern. If you consent, that alert will require professionals to look closely at any attempt to remove your control. I read it twice, not because I doubted my understanding, but because I wanted to feel the weight of those words settle somewhere firm. A safeguarding alert. That would be the opposite of what Leah planned. She had offered me the LPA as a kindness. If an authority looked at it as pressure, the ground would change under her feet. I took a long bath to quiet my hands, then laid out what I would wear in the morning and packed my bag like a teacher packing a practical lesson, documents in plastic sleeves, policy sheet on top, USBs in a glasses case with the old lenses removed, Tom's pen in the spine of a notebook, and a small sealed envelope marked only if necessary, containing the postcard he had written me years ago. The postcard wasn't evidence in any legal sense, but it reminded me that I had once been entrusted with both the cash tin and the heart of a man who didn't believe I needed supervision. Sleep came in skips. At 4, I made tea and watched the street. A fox trotted along the wall and paused at the corner as if deciding whether to turn left or vanish. At 6, I phoned Hetty and asked her to meet me outside my house so we could walk together. She said yes without asking why, which is why you choose certain friends for certain mornings. We reached the solicitor's office just before 9. It was on the first floor above a bakery, the smell of warm bread making the waiting room feel less like a place where people argue in writing. The receptionist led us to a room with a round table. Turner stood when we entered. A woman in her 40s with hair she had clearly cut herself for practical reasons and eyes that said she had learned to listen before talking. Mrs. Holt, she said, I'm Eleanor. Thank you for coming. Her handshake was dry and steady. She gestured to chairs. Tell me everything, from the envelope in the cake tin onward. She didn't interrupt. When I was done, she asked just 3 questions. Do you still hold any physical items they asked you to sign? Have they ever had unsupervised access to your house keys? And would you consent to my contacting the bank's fraud team directly, with your authority, so they can freeze any further changes while we sort the governance? Yes, yes, and yes. She dictated a letter to her assistant in the next room. We act for Mrs. Margaret Holt. Our client is concerned that charitable funds have been transferred to an entity styled Caldine Community Trust without a valid authorizing resolution, and that a document bearing a signature purporting to be hers has been circulated. Please confirm that no further mandate changes will be processed and that all existing arrangements are placed under review pending verification of signatory authority. Kindly note also that any attempt to procure a lasting power of attorney from our client is subject to safeguarding considerations. We are notifying the relevant local authority accordingly. Then she turned back to me. You'll need a formal paper trail, she said. Minutes of any meeting where this trust was discussed, correspondence inviting you to sign, and an explanation for the error in the clinic's public thanks. We'll file a subject access request to the bank for device and IP logs relating to the mandate change. It will show who logged in and when. That's often decisive when signatures are disputed. She paused. And the camera footage? I slid the glasses case across the table and she smiled faintly at the ingenuity. We'll duplicate and timestamp it, she said. If anything happens to your copies, ours will remain admissible. She turned to Hetty. Would you be willing to sign a witness statement about what you heard Oliver ask your husband? Hetty nodded, solemn and fierce. He wanted a silent trustee. I'll put that in writing. On the way out, Eleanor stopped me in the corridor. One more thing. You asked about a legal lever that doesn't rely on a public fight. If you declare, in writing, that you feel under pressure about finances, the bank can classify you as requiring enhanced safeguarding for the specific context of mandate changes. That means they must slow everything down and require in-person verification for changes others request on your behalf. It's not a declaration of incapacity, it's a declaration of boundary. Most people don't realize they can ask for that. I thought of Leah's sentence, "If you're tired, we can do this instead," and felt a grim satisfaction at the idea of using the same word to anchor the opposite outcome. We left with a plan that fit in one page, but touched every part of the mess. Stop the money moving, demand the papers, preserve the images, and shine a light on the kind of help that installs locks you can't open. I stopped at the clinic to book a blood pressure check, not because I needed it urgently, but because I wanted an excuse to ask the manager for copies of any correspondence about the donation. She met me in her small office, where a child's drawing of a nurse with red hair smiled from a notice board. When I asked about the £5,000 that became £3,500 online, she hesitated, then opened her email and clicked through folders. "We received 2 transfers, actually," she said. First £3,500 from an account labeled Caldine Community Trust, then another £1,500 from an individual account in the name of— she turned the screen so I could see. The name was Crane Administrative Services. Not Crane and Company. Accounting. Not Oliver personally. A third thing. She added, "We consolidated the thanks post because it was simpler." I didn't realize the names would matter. They mattered. The trust had paid most of it. A company with a similar name had topped it up. Why split it? Why not a single transfer from the trust if that was now the vehicle? I asked for a PDF of the bank confirmations and she sent them while I watched. At home, I printed the PDFs and compared the account names against companies' house records. The internet is not my natural habitat, but numbers and names make their own paths once you know what to look for. Crane Administrative Services Ltd. existed. Its director was Oliver Crane. The company had been registered shortly before the trust was formed. Its nature of business was a bland code that could be anything. More interesting was a footnote in the filing history, a change of registered address to the same co-working space where Leah's lifestyle admin business took mail. I took a pen and circled the 2 addresses until the circles met. At 5, Daniel arrived unannounced. He let himself in with the key he still had from when he used to visit without his wife. He stood in the kitchen doorway, looking older than his 39 years in a way that had nothing to do with lines on his face. "Mom," he began, "Leah says you embarrassed her at the meeting. People think you don't trust her. She's been doing so much." I kept my voice level. "I trust evidence, Daniel. I have a solicitor now. We've asked the bank to freeze changes until the paperwork is verified." He flinched at the word solicitor, as if I had decided to take a stranger into the bathroom while I was bathing. "Is that necessary?" "More than necessary." He glanced at the stack of printouts on the table, then at the old photograph of Tom I keep by the salt. "This is getting out of hand," he said, not lifting his eyes. "Then put your hand where it belongs," I said. "On the side of the truth." He left without shouting, which is his way of being angry with dignity. 10 minutes later, my phone pinged with a message from Leah. "We need to clear the air. I'll drop by at 8. Daniel will be with me." I didn't reply. Instead, I called Eleanor and told her Leah was coming. She advised me to set my phone to record in my pocket, not to bait, only to have a contemporaneous note of anything said. "And unlock your front door from the inside before they arrive," she added, "so they can't claim you refused to let them in and then use that to allege you're not managing your affairs." She thought in 3 directions at once, and I was glad she did. At 8 sharp, Leah and Daniel walked in. Leah was carrying a paper bag with a lemon tart from the expensive bakery on the high street, a peace offering with a receipt that would later be used to say she provides. She placed it on the counter, took in the spread of documents, and smiled. "You've been busy," she said. "I like to be informed." I folded my hands and waited. "We only want what's best for you," she began. "The trust formalizes what you and Tom built. And the LPA is just a safety net. Imagine something happened to you and bills were missed. People would blame us for not stepping up. You attempted to backdate a resolution," I said, "and someone signed my name." She didn't blink. "If there's a misunderstanding, we can correct it." She lifted the resignation form from the envelope where I'd put it back after the haul. "You didn't sign this yet. That can add to the confusion." She placed a pen beside it with a little click. "Leah," I said, £3,500 came from the trust and £1,500 from Crane Administrative Services. Why not a single transfer? Her reply was smooth. Cash flow. The trust account card hadn't arrived, so Oliver bridged the gap from his company and will be reimbursed. Standard practice. I watched her mouth shape those words and pictured the company's house page. And why does his company share a mail slot with yours? Daniel exhaled sharply. This is getting conspiratorial. Leah touched his arm. We sometimes use the same office services. That's all. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. I took out the policy page Imogen had given me and slid it across. The bank has flagged the mandate change. No further alterations without in-person verification. Leah's eyelids lowered a fraction, then lifted. You asked them to treat you as vulnerable, she said. No. I asked them to treat me as someone who will not sign blind. She laughed softly, the kind of laugh that persuades a room to forgive a mistake before it's admitted. Maggie, our intentions are good. Intentions don't balance accounts, I said, and surprised myself with how tired my voice sounded. We went round like that for an hour. Daniel tried to mediate and failed because he wanted to keep both chairs under him. Leah tried every door: duty, love, fatigue, guilt, nostalgia, and finally threat disguised as inevitability. If you make this hostile, it will look bad, she said at last. For you. People like stories where the old guard can't let go. I stood and felt the ache in my knees I usually ignore. Then we'll give them a different story, I said. One where governance exists for a reason. Leave now. We'll speak through the solicitor. Leah lifted the lemon tart as if to take it back, then changed her mind and left it on the counter as she walked out, a prop abandoned between scenes. 2 days later, Eleanor emailed copies of letters sent by courier, to the bank, to the trust, to Oliver's company, to Leah personally. They were firm without being dramatic. They asked for the trust deed, for the minutes authorizing the transfer, for a breakdown of payments including any fees to trustees or associated companies, and for written confirmation that no attempt would be made to register an LPA without independent assessment. Within hours, the replies began. Oliver's company responded with a short note saying any fee arrangements were internal administrative matters and commercially sensitive. Leah replied with warmth that felt like insulation. Of course, full transparency, followed by an attachment that was not the trust deed but a glossy mission statement with a pastel logo. The bank acknowledged receipt and said the relevant team would contact Eleanor directly. The clinic manager forwarded a thread from Leah asking her to please align public references to the trust branding so donors aren't confused, which read differently now than it had before. Imogen phoned me after her shift ended and asked, almost as a friend, if anyone else had access to my post. They shouldn't, I said. But Leah sometimes collects it for me after church. She took a slow breath. If a code for device activation went missing, that would matter. After we hung up, I checked the cake tin where I had first put the envelope with the activation code. It was not there. I keep my house tidy. I don't misplace official envelopes. I opened every drawer where I might have absent-mindedly tucked it. Nothing. I sat down and pressed my fingers to my temples until I could think without the rush of hot fear. That evening, Ludo knocked and stood on the step with a small plastic bag. Found this in the hall's rubbish after the AGM, he said. It had your address on the back page torn. Inside the bag were 3 pieces of a white envelope with the bank's logo on the corner. The tear pattern, even through smears of tea, matched the missing activation letter's fold. I don't know how it got there, Ludo said. But it didn't walk. He didn't step over the threshold, as if knowing I needed the line between outside and inside to mean something. I'll write a note about where I found it and when, he added. Thank you, I said, and put the bag in the freezer like something you might need to preserve. The next morning, Eleanor called early. The bank's fraud team has pulled device logs, she said. They can't give us data yet, but they've confirmed there were 2 online sessions associated with the mandate change, one from Leah's usual IP and one from a coffee shop on High Street the night before the code letter was sent. Oliver would never be so clumsy, I thought. Leah had always been the one who liked to do things herself. Eleanor continued, also, I've checked the trust registration. Their deed lists as trustees, you, Leah Holt, Daniel Holt, and, Crane, professional. It states that a monthly administrative fee may be paid to a related party for implementation. That's vague by design. She paused. We are sending a letter to company's house requesting expedited access to the deed copy. In the meantime, I want you to consider something strategic. I waited. You fear being treated as a burden, she said, gentler. But in this context, declaring yourself temporarily under duress for financial decisions triggers a safeguarding protocol that forces all counterparties to slow down and document every touch. It is not the same as declaring incapacity. I'm not asking you to pretend to be unable. I am asking you to use the system that exists to protect people precisely in moments like this. I let out the breath I had been holding. Do it, I said. If the word they used to disarm me can be used to arm me, do it. She filed the alert that afternoon. A social worker named Priya phoned me the next day. Her voice was calm, the kind people use with skittish horses and embarrassed adults. I'm not here to tell you what to do, she said. I'm here to make sure any decision you make is yours. I'll visit tomorrow, if that's all right, and I'll ask questions Leah won't like. I laughed, surprised by the sound. Come at 11, I said. I'll make tea. After we hung up, I rang Hetty. Bring your common sense at 10:30, I said. I'll need another pair of eyes. Priya arrived exactly on time with an ID badge and a notebook that had been opened and used, which made me trust it more than if it had been pristine. She sat at my table and asked clear questions. Who handled my post? Who had my keys? Who had suggested the LPA? What had changed in recent weeks to make me uneasy? I answered plainly. She noted down names, dates, phrases. I will record that you are alert and making decisions, she said. I will also record that you feel pressured and that financial arrangements have been altered around you without proper governance. That combination tends to make agencies pay attention. At the door, she added, if anyone attempts to register an LPA or lodge anything with your GP without your consent, they are to contact me first. I will copy Leah into none of this. You're the client. 2 hours later, Daniel texted asking why a social worker had contacted him to verify whether he held my keys. He did not ask if I was all right. He asked why she had called him. I replied that the council wanted to ensure boundaries were respected while the charity governance was clarified. He phoned immediately, panicked by the word council, and accused me of making a scene. This is private family business, he said. No, I replied. This is charitable money and my legal agency. Those are public matters. I could hear Leah in the room with him whispering things I've only ever heard in HR meetings: reputational risk, optics, aligned messaging. I hung up before my anger made me sloppy. The following day, an envelope with the trust deed arrived at my door by courier. Someone had underlined sentences in blue, as if to guide me to the harmless parts. It listed my name as a trustee, which was absurd. I had never signed. It contained a scanned resolution with the rounded G I never make. It also contained a schedule of fees, £400 per month to a related administrative service. No name there, only a bank sort code and account number. I compared it to the clinic's second transfer confirmation. The numbers matched the account for Crane Administrative Services. The fake benefactor had been installed with a stipend and the community would have applauded him as a volunteer. I took a photograph of the page and sent it to Eleanor with the subject line, Related Party equals Oliver's Company, Stipend concealed in schedule. Her reply came fast. That's the inconsistency we needed. We set a meeting for the following Tuesday at the hall, not public this time but formal, with notice to all committee members. The vicar insisted on neutral facilitation. Priya agreed to attend as an observer specifically for the LPA issue. Imogen could not attend in any official capacity, but sent a colleague from the bank's community team, a man named Tariq who arrived with a notebook and a face that gives nothing away. I wore Tom's badge on my collar. Leah entered arm in arm with Daniel, both of them composed. Oliver came with a document wallet and left it closed in front of him like an ornament. Eleanor led. We're here to clarify governance, she said. Please provide the original signed trust deed and the minutes authorizing the transfer of funds. Oliver handed over copies and began to explain best practice. Eleanor listened, then asked, "And the wet ink signatures?" He produced a deed with signatures in blue. Eleanor compared my purported signature to one I had just made in her office that morning. "The loop on the G is inconsistent," she said evenly. "That will be one of several features a handwriting expert will consider." Leah spoke then, voice soft. "Maggie, you must have forgotten signing. It was after the coffee morning. You were tired. We thought less paper at once would be easier." Priya's pen stopped moving. Tarek looked up for the first time. Eleanor kept her tone level. "Mrs. Holt remembers what she signs. We also have device logs indicating an online session from a cafe the night the activation code was issued. We will be seeking CCTV if necessary. For now, the question is simple. Absent a valid authorizing resolution, the funds should not have moved. We ask that the trust cease any further expenditure and that the bank freeze the account pending clarification." Tarek nodded once. "We have already instituted a precautionary hold," he said. Leah turned to him with a smile that long experience had taught her could melt obstacles. It didn't melt him. We broke for 10 minutes at the vicar's insistence. In the corridor, Leah stepped close. "You've gone too far," she said, the sugar gone from her voice. "You've dragged strangers into family." I lowered mine. "You turned neighbors into a brand." She tilted her chin. "If you keep pushing, we'll register the LPA. You'll be grateful later when you see how easy life becomes." I almost laughed at the miscalculation. "Try," I said. "Priya will enjoy that conversation." Leah's eyes flashed and cooled. "You've always needed me," she said, a sentence so odd I nearly asked her to repeat it. "I've kept things going while you've played at being essential." She walked away as if the corridor were a runway. Back in the room, Eleanor asked Ludo to describe what he had seen at the entrance table the day before the AGM. He did, plainly, naming the time and the faces, and handed over a copy of the recording log he keeps for maintenance issues. "And the curate pulling the plug?" Eleanor asked. The vicar answered for him. "He made an error in judgment," he said, shame in his voice. "He thought he was preventing embarrassment." He didn't say whose. Leah kept her eyes on the wall clock. We closed that meeting without a final resolution, but with the freeze in place and a paper trail started. It wasn't victory, but it was the path toward one. On the way out, Imogen's colleague slipped me his card and murmured, "We'll need you to confirm in branch next week to renew the safeguard flag. Bring ID and the letter from your solicitor. Process, not promises." I can live on process a while. That weekend, I did something that would have mortified me a month earlier. I told the street WhatsApp I was accepting short-term help with shopping through the volunteer scheme while the governance issue was sorted. I did it not because I needed someone to carry milk, but because the act of accepting support, publicly and on my terms, activated a small grant attached to the residence fund for clients under temporary stress. If the trust wanted to present me as a burden, I would become one in a way that forced them to account for it. A reversed weakness. The grant required the trust to log my support as an expenditure and justify it under their own mission. The effect was immediate. Leah wrote privately to ask me not to use the scheme while we sort optics. I replied with a screenshot of the guidelines that said trustees must not discourage eligible clients from accessing assistance. She didn't reply. On Monday, Priya called to check in and mentioned, almost as an aside, that someone had phoned the council asking whether they could fast-track an LPA for a relative whose capacity fluctuates. "We don't fast-track those," she said dryly. "We assess. And your capacity is as solid as my kettle." We both laughed. It felt like air. That afternoon, I stopped by the hall to give Ludo a loaf I had baked. In the foyer, I noticed a new flyer on the notice board, Caldine Community Trust, Launch Evening, celebrating our new era. It listed speakers, Leah, Oliver, and special thanks to Daniel. My name appeared at the bottom under Founding Inspiration, which is a way to thank the dead or the displaced. I pulled the flyer down and turned it over. On the back was a handwritten list of VIPs. One of the names was the clinic manager circled. Another was a counselor I knew only as the man who had once complained about the hall's parking hours. I slipped the paper into my bag. If they planned to debut the trust publicly, that would be the place to show the parts of the truth they preferred to call confusion. That night, while I was making tea, I heard my letterbox flap. I went to the door and found an unmarked envelope on the mat. Inside was a single page, a printout of an email from Oliver to Leah. We should reimburse from the trust to my company in 2 tranches to avoid raising flags on a single payment. Round to nearest £750. Use implementation as line item. At the bottom, in biro, someone had written, "Thought you should see what they call transparency." No signature. The ally in the shadows had finally stepped onto the edge of the light. I looked at the paper's torn corner and saw the faint outline of a perforation, the kind from a pad the hall uses for volunteer notes. An internal watcher, not an outsider. We decided, Eleanor and I, that we would not send that email yet. We would hold it until the launch evening, when a document on a screen would be harder to deny. In the meantime, we pressed on with process. Handwriting expert instructed, SAR lodged, company's house copy of the deed requested, social care note logged, bank freeze maintained, minutes demanded. I slept better not because the danger had passed, but because it had changed shape into something I could count. On the morning of the launch, the sky hung low and the hall smelled faintly of polish and ambitions. People arrived in better clothes than usual. Leah wore a suit the color of rain and a blouse that said successful but approachable. Daniel looked as if he had ironed for once. Oliver wore confidence and a tie any judge would have recognized. The curate avoided my eyes. Ludo had set the projector with 2 separate power feeds and gaffer-taped the plugs to the floor. Imogen had taken unpaid leave and sat near the back with Tarek, who nodded to me without expression. Priya sat at the aisle end with a council notebook visible on her lap like a small bright flag. The clinic manager slid in and gave me a strange, apologetic smile I couldn't read. Leah opened with practiced warmth and a story about Tom teaching her how to sell raffle tickets. She thanked Daniel for encouraging us to modernize and Oliver for bringing governance. She invoked my name like a hymn and suggested I would be so proud to see the fund evolve. People clapped because stories are easier than documents. Then Oliver took the microphone and displayed a slide titled Structure. Boxes and arrows. He moved through it quickly, naming trustees, mentioning a modest admin fee without numbers, and clicking to a slide that said Transparency in a font large enough to hide anything. Eleanor stood. "Before you go further," she said, "Mrs. Holt has a document to show that bears upon your claim to transparency." Leah smiled with her teeth and gestured graciously. "Of course. We welcome questions." I walked to the front with the email printout and the USBs and handed them to Tarek and Ludo, not to Oliver. Ludo loaded the footage to prove the practice of swapping signatures at the entrance table. Tarek held the email until the moment would sting. The hall lights dimmed. The screen showed the table by the entrance the day before the AGM. The man in the ill-fitting suit. The camel coat that was mine on Leah's shoulders. The sheet slid across, the pen lifted, the left-handed flourish that isn't mine. A murmur began somewhere near the back and rolled forward. When the clip ended, Leah said into the silence, "That looks bad out of context," and for the first time her voice lacked air. Tarek stepped forward and read a paragraph from the bank's policy about backdating and signature verification. "We will not accept documentation where the customer disputes the validity of their signature," he said. "Any further movement of funds is frozen pending resolution." Oliver cleared his throat to speak, but Eleanor was already lifting the second item, the printed email about reimbursements. She handed it to the vicar and asked him to read the line about avoiding flags out loud. He did, and when he looked up, his face held the expression of a man who has been used. Leah straightened, ready to perform contrition or counterattack. I couldn't yet tell which. And then something happened which I had not expected. Daniel stood up without looking at his wife. He turned to the room, took a breath that shook more than he hoped, and said, "I didn't know about any of this. Mom, I didn't know." Leah reached for his sleeve, and he didn't move. The sound the room made then was not applause or outrage. It was the low release of pressure when a seal breaks. Eleanor leaned to my ear and whispered, "Now we ask the simple question that makes the complicated answers unravel." I nodded and stepped to the microphone. "Show us the original deed," I said, "with my wet ink signature." Show us the minutes authorizing the transfer, with dates that match the bank's logs. Show us the schedule of fees with names, not euphemisms. Oliver opened his leather folder at last. He lifted a deed and laid it on the table like an offering. The signature next to my printed name was precise and wrong, the G looped as if it had been taught to perform. Priya moved closer to the table and took a photograph. Leah saw the angle of the evening change and pivoted hard. Maggie, she said, I've been trying to hold this together. You've been struggling more than you admit. You told me last month you can't manage the post. Her eyes shone with effort. I'm sorry, everyone, but I can't let her hurt the community because she's proud. It was a last throw, an attempt to make the room choose between me and the idea of continuity. I didn't argue with her assessment of my pride. I lifted the council letter Priya had given me confirming that I was assessed as fully capable and that any attempt to register an LPA without my consent would be flagged. Priya raised her hand from the aisle. For the record, she said, Mrs. Holt is capable and pressure of the kind described is a safeguarding concern in itself. Leah's mouth opened and closed without a sentence emerging. I think that was the moment she understood that the ground had tilted. Not because I shouted, not because I cried, but because every small piece of paper and policy had been stacked until it made a shape larger than her confidence. Then, from the side door near the vestry, the curate entered with an object wrapped in a tea towel. He walked to the front, placed it on the table, and unwrapped it to reveal a shredding machine with the hall's inventory labels still attached. He looked at Leah and then at Oliver and then at me. I'm sorry, he said to the room. On the day of the AGM, I was asked to help tidy by disposing of outdated forms. This was among them. He held up a half-shredded sheet that had survived because it had jammed, the top half of a page titled Caldine Fund, Committee Resolution, with my real signature visible on an older document unrelated to the trust. Someone had started to feed legitimate papers into a machine to clear the rubble and had not expected a jam to preserve a corner. The hall did not breathe. Ludo reached for the shredder's plug and detached it as if it might bite. Eleanor's face changed in a way I will not describe, but hope never to be on the wrong side of. Leah's hands were very still on the table. Oliver stared at the half-shredded page as if he could will it to disappear. The vicar asked everyone to sit. He said we would proceed step by step, with the bank and the council and the law watching. He said the trust's launch was postponed. He said many other things that didn't matter in that second, because every pair of eyes was on the torn page in the curate's shaking hand. We agreed to reconvene in 1 week with proper oversight. People stood to leave, speaking in low voices that found a level neither kind nor cruel. On my way out, as I reached for my coat, I felt a hand brush my sleeve. I turned, expecting Hetty, but it was the clinic's receptionist, a young woman who always smiles at me when I bring biscuits. Her voice was barely above the hum of chairs. Check the trust account for a payment line coded Hall Services, she whispered. It isn't for chairs. Then she slipped away into the crowd, leaving the words between us like a match left near paper. When I reached home and set my bag on the table, I realized the glasses case with the backup USB was no longer in the side pocket where I had kept it all day. I emptied the bag carefully, lifted every paper, checked the floor by the door, and stared at the small hollow where evidence should have been and was not. The morning of the dinner was heavy with anticipation. I had spent the previous week preparing not food but documents, conversations, and quiet rehearsals in my mind. Victoria had insisted on hosting a family gathering at my house under the pretense of celebrating Kevin's latest promotion. In truth, I knew it was a stage she wanted for my surrender. They expected me to sign the contract that would strip me of everything. Instead, I would use their chosen stage to strip them of the illusion of control. The table was set with my mother's china, the same set Victoria had once called old-fashioned. Kevin uncorked a bottle of wine as if he already owned the place, his laughter too loud, his gestures too grand. Victoria moved through the dining room with the grace of a hostess, greeting relatives and neighbors she had invited without asking me. My name was used sparingly, my presence treated like that of an elderly relative allowed to sit at the edge of her own home. Each slight word, each careless gesture only steeled my resolve. When everyone was seated, Victoria stood, glass raised. She thanked everyone for coming, praised Kevin's hard work, and then, with that calculated pause she had inherited from her father, turned her eyes toward me. Tonight is also about planning for the future. My mother has a big decision to make, one that will ensure her comfort and our ability to support her as she deserves. Kevin placed a folder at my side, the familiar contract waiting for my signature. A hush spread through the room, as if they all anticipated a performance. I looked at the faces surrounding me. My sister Helen, cautious but curious. Neighbors from down the street, some whispering already. Kevin's colleagues, seated with smug interest. And Victoria, her hand lightly resting on my shoulder as if guiding me to the inevitable. I let the moment stretch before speaking. I do indeed have a decision to make. But it is not the one you think. A murmur rippled across the table. I pulled an envelope from my bag, the same bag Victoria had dismissed as worn and outdated. Inside were documents Fitzgerald had prepared after we reviewed Robert's will together. I placed them neatly beside the contract Kevin had slid over. Before I sign anything, I said, my voice steady, everyone here should understand the truth about this house and Robert's intentions. Kevin chuckled, though his eyes darkened. Margaret, no one wants to go through boring paperwork at a dinner. Let's just keep this simple. He reached for the contract again, but I placed my hand on it firmly. Simple is good, Kevin. Let's keep it very simple. According to Robert's will, filed properly with Fitzgerald and the county clerk, this property belongs entirely to me for as long as I live. Upon my passing, it is to be placed in a trust for my grandchildren's education. Not for Victoria, not for Kevin, not for anyone's personal debt relief. Gasps came from several directions. My sister leaned forward, eyes wide. Kevin laughed again, but it was a hollow sound. That's not what we were told, Margaret. Victoria assured me the will gave her full inheritance rights. I nodded slowly. Yes, she told many people that, including Fitzgerald himself, when she lied that I was traveling and too fragile to attend the reading. The secretary confirmed it, and here is the log of those calls. I unfolded a printout Fitzgerald had provided, showing dates, times, and Victoria's signature where she had falsely acknowledged receipt of my inheritance papers. The room was silent except for the rustle of paper. Victoria's hand trembled slightly as she reached for her glass. Mom, you must be mistaken. Maybe Fitzgerald misfiled something. I slid another page across the table. This, I said, is Robert's handwritten note to me, dated 2 months before he passed. It directs me to Fitzgerald and confirms that under no circumstance was I to sign anything without consulting him. His handwriting. His words. Witnessed by his longtime secretary. A notarized copy exists in Fitzgerald's office. I paused, watching the color drain from my daughter's face. Kevin leaned forward, anger creeping into his tone. Even if that's true, Margaret, the upkeep of this property is unsustainable for you. Taxes, maintenance, all of it. Eventually you'll fail, and then what? You'll be forced to sell. His confidence faltered as I lifted yet another document. Robert set aside a maintenance fund precisely for that reason. Accessible only by me. Enough to cover taxes and repairs for the next 15 years. Another clause you weren't aware of, because you never had access to the full will. Neighbors began whispering more openly now. My sister shook her head in disbelief. Victoria's friends exchanged uneasy glances. And then, before Victoria could recover, a voice from the end of the table broke the tension. Mrs. Sullivan is telling the truth. All eyes turned to Mr. Lopez, the building's longtime caretaker, whom Victoria had dismissed as a forgettable background figure. He held up a small envelope. I was asked by Mr. Robert months before he passed to hold on to this and give it to Mrs. Sullivan if there was ever any dispute about the house. He looked directly at Victoria. I was also present when you came asking questions about ownership and inheritance. And I heard what you said about getting rid of your mother as soon as possible. The silence was deafening. Victoria's fork clattered against her plate. Kevin muttered something under his breath, but the damage was already done. Lopez handed me the envelope, and inside was a key to a safe deposit box and a brief note. Margaret, if anyone ever pressures you, this will protect you. The box contained duplicates of every document Fitzgerald had, as well as account statements proving Robert's foresight. I placed the key on the table deliberately. Everything you've hidden, every lie you've told, every attempt to erase me, it ends tonight. Kevin rose abruptly, knocking over his chair. This is absurd. She's manipulating you all. Victoria tried to stand as well, but her knees buckled slightly. Eyes around the table were no longer sympathetic to them. They were measuring, judging, calculating the meaning of what had just been revealed. I looked at my daughter, who sat frozen, her mouth slightly open, her carefully painted mask slipping in front of everyone she had sought to impress. For the first time in months, I felt no tremor in my voice, no fear in my chest. I stood, gathering the papers. I think we've heard enough for one evening. Tomorrow, these documents will be filed with the court to ensure Robert's wishes are fully respected. The guests shifted uncomfortably. Some avoided Victoria's eyes. Others stared at Kevin with quiet contempt. I could sense the tide turning, the same neighbors and relatives who had whispered that I was fragile now recognizing the truth. Their silence was no longer against me. It was against her. As I prepared to leave the room, Lopez's voice stopped me again. Mrs. Sullivan, there's something else you should know. Something I overheard Kevin discussing last week with a colleague. It might change everything you think you understand. The room went still once more, every eye turning toward him, every breath caught in collective anticipation. Lopez's words hung in the air like a weight pressing down on everyone. He glanced nervously toward Kevin, who had gone pale, then turned to me with a mixture of guilt and resolve. I overheard Kevin at the hardware store last week, Lopez said slowly. He was speaking to one of his colleagues about timing everything so that by the end of this month, you would be out of the house regardless of what papers existed. He used the words, one way or another. Gasps moved around the table. Kevin tried to laugh it off, though his voice cracked. Ridiculous. Taken out of context. But even Victoria didn't back him this time. Her hands twisted the napkin on her lap into knots. People at the table shifted, whispering. Kevin's attempt at control faltered before the weight of the revelation. I took a deep breath. You wanted this to be public, Victoria. You wanted an audience for my humiliation. Instead, everyone will remember this evening as the moment your lies ended. Tomorrow, I'll be filing these documents with the court, and Fitzgerald will take the necessary steps to protect Robert's wishes and my dignity. Kevin leaned forward, his voice harsh. You'll regret this. You don't know the consequences of crossing us. I didn't flinch. No, Kevin. It is you who will discover the consequences of trying to erase me. The dinner ended not with applause or comfort, but with the silence of people who had witnessed too much. Guests left quickly, avoiding Victoria and Kevin's eyes, some patting my shoulder as they passed. Helen lingered, her face pale, but her hand warm as she squeezed mine. Margaret, she whispered, I always suspected, but I didn't have the courage. You were braver than I ever thought possible. Her words steadied me. After she left, I collected the papers and locked them in Robert's old briefcase, the same one he had carried to work every day. I placed the key from Lopez inside as well. For the first time in years, I slept without waking at every sound. The next morning, Victoria appeared alone at my door, her eyes swollen from a night of tears. She stood there in silence before finally speaking. Mom, please don't take this to court. It will destroy us. My voice was calm, though it shook slightly with the memory of every humiliation. It was not I who destroyed us, Victoria. It was your choices. She covered her face with her hands, but I did not reach to comfort her. That instinct, once so strong, had finally loosened. She left without another word. Fitzgerald met me at his office later that day. He greeted me with a firm handshake and a folder already prepared. We will file the necessary injunctions today, Mrs. Sullivan. This will ensure that no transfer of property or alteration of inheritance can take place without judicial review. He looked at me seriously. Do you wish to pursue charges of fraud against your daughter and son-in-law? The word fraud sat heavy on the desk between us. I closed my eyes briefly. I do not wish to destroy my daughter, but I will not protect Kevin. File the charges against him. Leave Victoria's name off for now. Fitzgerald nodded, understanding more than I could say. The weeks that followed were filled with hearings, letters, and the slow machinery of justice. Kevin fought with all the arrogance he could muster, but the documents were undeniable. His forged attempts at power of attorney, the contract disguised as a gift, the lies he told the bank, all collapsed under scrutiny. Victoria was called to testify. I watched her struggle on the stand, her eyes darting between Kevin and me, torn between loyalty to a husband who had led her down this path and the mother she had betrayed. When the judge asked whether she had known of Kevin's actions in full, her silence was more powerful than any admission. The court froze Kevin's accounts and barred him from approaching me. He left the courtroom that day with rage burning in his eyes, but no power left in his hands. Victoria did not return home with him. A week later, she came to see me again. This time her tone was different, stripped of arrogance. I was blind, Mom. I thought he loved me. I thought we were building something together. I said nothing at first. She reached across the table for my hand, but I did not move mine. Finally, I said, love does not need contracts and forged signatures. It does not need to erase family to feel strong. She cried openly, her shoulders shaking. I let her cry, but I did not comfort her. Some distances cannot be crossed so easily. Neighbors changed too. Those who once whispered about my fragility now greeted me with new respect. At church, Mrs. Klein pressed my hand tightly. You showed them, Margaret. You showed all of us that silence isn't weakness. Even at the grocery store, people who had once looked at me with pity now nodded with acknowledgement. It wasn't admiration I sought, but it was dignity returned. Kevin eventually lost his job. Word of his behavior spread further than he imagined, and no company wanted a man associated with fraud and elder coercion. Victoria filed for separation 6 months later. She visited occasionally, cautiously, as if unsure whether she was still allowed in my life. Each time she came, I kept our conversations polite but short. She would have to rebuild trust one brick at a time, if that was even possible. As for me, I began something new. I volunteered twice a week at the Community Legal Aid Center, helping others review paperwork, wills, and contracts. Many of the people who came in were elderly, uncertain, and frightened, just as I had been. I listened to their stories, guided them toward resources, and reminded them that their signatures were not just marks on paper, but shields of their dignity. It gave me purpose again, a reason to rise each morning beyond defending myself. One afternoon, a young woman came in, nervous and clutching a folder. She had been pressured by her brother to sign over her share of their parents' estate. As I helped her outline her rights, I saw the fear in her eyes slowly shift into something stronger. Gratitude, perhaps. Or the first spark of resolve. When she left, she turned at the door. Thank you, she said simply. And in her voice, I heard echoes of my own journey. Sometimes, late at night, I sit in Robert's old chair with the briefcase at my side. I do not dwell on the betrayals, but on the fact that I endured them and emerged with my dignity intact. My greatest fear had been becoming a burden. Yet it was by accepting help from Fitzgerald, from Lopez, from even my neighbors, that I found the strength to stand. Reversed weakness turned into strength. I learned that dignity is not in pretending we need nothing, but in knowing when to fight for everything. Victoria has begun writing me letters. Some are apologies, some are attempts at conversation, all tinged with regret. I do not yet know if I will answer. Forgiveness is not a door that opens quickly. It is a path that must be chosen carefully. For now, silence feels safer. Kevin, last I heard, had moved out of town, carrying his bitterness with him. I feel no satisfaction in his downfall, only relief that he can no longer reach me. Justice was served not by vengeance, but by exposure, by allowing the truth to stand where lies once flourished. The house is quiet these days, but it is my quiet, earned and protected. I tend the garden Robert planted, I read in the evenings, and I keep my papers in order. Sometimes Helen visits, and we laugh more than we ever did in the past. She tells me I am stronger than she imagined. I tell her strength is not what you show others, but what you do when no one believes you have any left. And so life moves on. I am not the same woman I was before Victoria and Kevin tried to erase me. I am something sharper, clearer, and calmer. My dignity is intact, my home secure, my purpose renewed. Perhaps one day, when I am gone, my grandchildren will learn this story and understand that justice is not a gift. It is something you must claim, even when your own blood stands against you. I close my eyes and picture Robert's handwriting in that short note he left me. Do not let anyone rush you. It echoes still, a promise kept. And as I look toward the years ahead, I know that whatever comes, I will not be erased again.